The virus defied anything they had ever seen. Sometimes it was airborne, sometimes it was not, and the worst part, it mutated daily. Even though the public followed every guideline, isolation, compliance, evacuation, none of it mattered. This was something that could not be stopped, and it was deadly. But where did the virus come from? How did it spread so easily? And what did it mean for the future of humanity? In this video, we explore the lore and story behind the Green Flu that tore humanity apart in Left 4 Dead. No one knows for sure where or why it started, but the story of the Green Flu began 2 weeks before the events of Left 4 Dead. It was at Mercy Hospital in Fairfield, Pennsylvania that patient 0 was believed to have been admitted to the intensive care unit after they had come in with irritability, aggression, and confusion. These symptoms were commonly seen in patients with rabies, as well as those suffering from encephalitis or meningitis. Each of these conditions can be caused by highly infectious pathogens, some capable of spreading through direct contact, respiratory droplets, or contaminated surfaces. If the patient was not handled properly, the risk of transmission to hospital staff or other patients was significant. Because of this, the ICU was quarantined from the rest of the hospital, and those who entered were required to wear the appropriate protective equipment such as respirator masks, disposable isolation gowns, face masks, and gloves. When more people came to the hospital with similar symptoms, they were directed to the quarantine area, and it became clear that there was something new. Whatever it was did not care about age, nationality, or sex, and even though the hospital followed every procedure to contain whatever this was, admissions into the ICU surged, staff members reported feeling unwell, and this cluster of isolated neurological cases was then suspected as a possible epidemic. It was here, on this first day, that the Civil Emergency and Defense Agency was brought in to determine exactly what Mercy Hospital was dealing with. A rapid assessment team was then sent to observe and assess the threat. Their objective was clear: contain the source, and most importantly, determine whether the hospital had just become ground zero for a larger crisis. Meanwhile, the staff continued to monitor their patients. Blood was withdrawn for testing, but over time, symptoms worsened. Patients declined mentally, began vomiting, their skin turned pale, eyes jaundiced, and their bodies grew weak. The irritability and aggression intensified, and they lunged at their carers, tried to bite and scratch them. They stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and even the slightest noise or glimpse of an uninfected person sent them into a violent rage. From the infected's perspective, it would have been terrifying. They could not be trusted around other humans without being restrained, and the people who wanted to help them appeared as demonic, warped entities as their eyes adapted into an orange tinge and their cognitive functions deteriorated. As the first day came to a close on what could be a new infection, CEDA planned the road ahead to pin down what this actually was and how to keep the public not only safe from it, but also themselves. In an attempt to reduce the spread of the infection as much as possible, CEDA offered information and guidance to the public through television, radio, and the internet. As Fairfield was a city, an urban area with a high population, it was essential to inform each person what they could do to help. As CEDA did not know exactly what they were dealing with or how it was transmitted, they fell back onto standard infection control protocols until they had time to conduct further research. They called this infection the Green Flu, and as a rapid response agency, they had signed and healthcare advice created and displayed in public areas, such as office buildings, cafes, and restaurants. Their most prominent was clean hands save lives. As cases continued to pop up across the city, people called in sick to work and isolated from those they suspected from being ill. Meanwhile, CEDA worked with the infected to find out exactly how this infection spread. Something like this could transmit in many ways. If it shared traits with rabies, bites were a primary concern, specifically whether infected saliva could enter the bloodstream. Other viruses like Ebola spread through direct contact with infected body fluids, particularly blood. HIV, while less contagious, can also spread through blood and certain other fluids under specific conditions. But not every patient showed signs of a bite or scratch, suggesting there might be another mode of transmission at work. Another possible route of transmission was airborne. We all breathe, talk, cough, and sneeze, and each of these actions release tiny droplets into the air, some of which can carry infectious material. If the pathogen could survive in those droplets, it would explain how people were getting sick without ever getting bitten. This is how diseases like measles and tuberculosis are known to spread. It was another avenue to explore, but there were others. One was fomite transmission, the spread of infection by touching a contaminated surface and then touching the face. Since viruses are known to survive on surfaces for hours, sometimes days, it became essential to enforce hand washing and glove use as a part of standard infection control. Another possibility was waterborne or foodborne transmission, the ingestion of a contaminated supply source. This could have been considered plausible in explaining some of the seemingly random cases that appeared across the city. Finally, transmission through livestock or other animals could not be ruled out in the early stages, especially in rural areas where human and animal contact was common. This theory was especially notable, as early news reports claimed the virus had spread through livestock in rural areas far beyond Pennsylvania. Communities slaughtered their livestock as the virus emerged, hoping to protect themselves from an outbreak. Despite their best efforts, CEDA failed to identify a single consistent method of transmission, and there was a reason for that. Weeks later, over in the Millhaven military outpost, the doctor there discovered just how volatile this virus was. It defied everything they had ever seen. Sometimes it was airborne, sometimes it was not. It mutated daily, and because they could not pin it down, they could not create a cure. It was impossible to counter. As for how fast it took those infected to turn, that was also different every time. For some, it took 4 days, 3 for others, 2.5 hours, 5 minutes. It was an aggressive, complex virus. Back on day 2, as those who fell ill stayed home, and those who felt fine went to work, they were given more information by CEDA. Those who believed they were infected were told to remain calm and quarantine themselves from the population immediately, to avoid contact with friends, families, and to reach out to a contamination facility for immediate screening. To the uninfected, they were told to go on as normal but to wash their hands, wear a face mask, and avoid anyone with erratic behavior. However, by the end of the second day, the green flu had taken over more of Fairfield. Even though the population had been advised to wash their hands, avoid those they believed to be infected, and generally followed the guidance given by CEDA, more people continued to get sick. It is likely that only a few had fully turned into rabid, aggressive individuals at this point, as it was widely believed that it took 4 days from the onset of the illness to complete transformation, at least at this point. With more people sick, CEDA pushed more of the population to stay at home and in secure locations. For this short-term isolation, they distributed a checklist on how to set up their own safe rooms. These were recommended to be in a fortified, windowless room, preferably underground. All openings were to be obstructed, secured by plastic sheeting or duct tape. Inside was to be an adequate supply of water, non-perishable foods, a first aid kit, a flashlight, necessary prescription medicines, and a radio to listen out for any updates from the authorities. And as the hours passed, these rooms were created in a subway station on Holly Street to a pawn shop to the hospital itself. These were all designed to keep people safe, but as the days passed and more of the population fully turned into zombies and began to attack everyone they saw, harsher measures were forced into place. CEDA saw how far downtown Fairfield had fallen and ordered that entire buildings, streets, and then blocks were quarantined and sealed away. Notices were placed to warn anyone that if they entered these places, the Civil Emergency and Defense Agency would prosecute them. As reports came in from other regions, CEDA sent out vans and mobile treatment centers to see if this had spread more than they had thought. One specific location was the Vanna Hotel in Savannah, Georgia. By approximately day 5, the general view of CEDA and the government changed. This was not a flu. It was something so much more, and they had been lied to in order to keep control of a possible mass panic. Fairfield continued to fall under the new waves of zombies, and additional regions were sealed off completely. Each day was worse than the last. Entire bridges were blocked to stop traffic, roadblocks were set up, buildings condemned, and citizens were encouraged to barricade their homes until they could leave for safety. Airports filled with those who had managed to escape Fairfield, but CEDA was always one step ahead. A new mandate required that anyone flying wear a face mask, have no cuts or wounds, and not have handled livestock within the past 48 hours. It was clear that CEDA still had no idea how this was transmitted. By the 25th of September, the Metro International Airport in Newburgh was shut down in an attempt to stop the spread to other parts of America and the world. Newburgh itself had also started to fall to the disease. CEDA knew that Fairfield had fallen when the hospital was taken over and the streets filled with zombies, but they still tried to help any survivors who had avoided the green flu. To help them, the local settlement of Riverside was advertised as a safe haven by the military, who had lost faith in CEDA's ability to deal with the epidemic. Across Fairfield, evacuation centers were also established to offer passage for survivors from the region into safe havens. The Hewlett Recreation Center and Borden High School were just two of many, but each one was overrun, and those inside fell. The safe rooms that had once been designed to wait out the disease became stopping points for survivors who were able to defend themselves, and the walls soon filled with their thoughts, frustrations, messages to friends and family, and most importantly, updates on which evacuation points were still running. They asked if this was man-made, if this was natural, or if it was God punishing them. By the time 2 weeks had passed, Fairfield had fallen completely, overrun. Even with military control, Riverside fell and the virus continued to spread. Many evacuation sites were set up, but each one fell victim to zombies. Those inside infested regions were left for dead by the military and fenced in. In a desperate attempt to stop the unauthorized use of planes to reach further regions, Metro International Airport was bombed along with cities and settlements that had been overrun by the infected. Despite their best efforts, they still had no idea how the virus was spreading, even as they searched for bites or any visible sign of transmission. There was something they were missing, and it was crucial. This virus mutated daily, and with it came the most terrifying aspect: the special infected. After analysing the infected population, CEDA determined that 63% of the victims had transformed into common infected. But what about the rest? They became something more, a unique variant, each with its own makeup and abilities shaped by the host biology and environment. Alternatively, these may have been victims of entirely new strains of the virus. Something like this should have taken thousands of years to evolve, but it happened in days, which only strengthened the theory that it had been engineered. CEDA identified 7 distinct variants of the special infected, though in truth, there were 8. They simply had not encountered a witch yet. And the witch? She was something else entirely. The witch was the first of 2 known female-specific variants, and easily the most disturbing. She lured in victims with a siren-like cry, but once disturbed, she flew into a frenzy, tearing them apart with elongated claws. Survivors learned quickly. The best strategy was to stay quiet and keep their distance. The second female variant, known as the spitter, accounted for roughly 4% of the infected. These experienced a harrowing transformation in which their jaws were forced open, allowing them to generate and expel corrosive acid. What made them dangerous was their ability to launch that acid with startling accuracy, often into crowded spaces. The haunting part was that they could not stop producing acid and had to constantly expel it. It has never been confirmed what caused an infected person to become a common, a witch, or a spitter, but theories have spread. Some believe witches were once women who had suffered devastating emotional trauma. Others speculated that spitters may have had pre-existing conditions such as ulcers that mutated alongside the virus. As for the male-specific special infected, well, 3% of the infected transformed into tanks. These massive, muscular abominations moved slowly, but they made up for it with overwhelming strength. They did not need to be close to a survivor to kill them. Instead, they hurled cars and heavy debris from a distance with incredible force. Their hardened skin also made them tough to put down, even with weapons. 4% of the infected turned into chargers. These were deadly. If a survivor heard their charge call, it was already too late. These infected were massive, with one arm far more swollen than the other, which acted as a battering ram. They also charged really fast. At another 4% of the infected population, jockeys were small, fast, and excellent leapers who knew exactly how to latch onto their target's shoulders. What made these even more dangerous was that they steered their victims into the path of a spitter's acid, a boomer, or worse, a witch. Smokers made up for 7% of the infected population. These nimble infected stalked their victims from the rooftops, leaving a trail of smoke behind them. Their elongated tongues lashed out like a chameleon's, dragging victims into crowds of infected. If wrapped around the neck, the smokers could pull them from high above, leaving them to hang. Making up 9% of the infected population, the hunter was the last of the male-specific variants and acted in a similar manner to the smoker. These were faster, fiercer, and far more dangerous than the common infected, often waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Once pinned down, their victims were torn apart by their claws. Just like the female variants, there were theories about what led to each male mutation. Tanks may have originated from those with extreme hormone imbalances or steroid use. Chargers could have developed from prior physical trauma or muscular disorders. Jockeys with their hunched forms were thought to stem from spinal deformities. Smokers were often believed to be former heavy smokers or terminal patients, while hunters may have once been athletes, soldiers, or those driven by aggression. Unlike the others, boomers appeared in both male and female forms, making up 6% of the infected population. These were grotesquely bloated and unstable, their bodies filled with a bile-like substance, and this bile was something else. It acted like a pheromone trigger. irresistible to the infected. When a boomer detected a survivor, its only goal was to vomit bile onto them. The bile immediately attracted nearby infected in overwhelming numbers. Interestingly, CEDA found a way to use this to their advantage. They harvested the bile and contained it in glass jars, using it to divert hordes of infected away from key areas. Survivors used them to protect themselves when hordes closed in. Fortunately, boomers were relatively easy to kill. A single shot was often enough to make them explode. When navigating, each survivor had to be extremely careful to avoid the cries of a witch, the shriek of a hunter, the thud of a tank, and the charge call of a charger. Outside of the chaos, the Millhaven military outpost continued its work and research in a bubble of safety. When in contact with anyone else, they wore tactical suits with full-face gas masks and sealed hoods, designed to protect against airborne particles, chemical agents, and biological contaminants. The team here had lost contact with CEDA, but they had discovered something unusual. Alongside their discovery of how volatile the virus was, they also identified a common trait in some of the survivors who had reached the base and nearby evacuation points. The doctor here and medical staff at other sites had encountered people who claimed to be immune. These were people who had been bitten or had direct contact with the infected, yet had not fallen ill. Upon further examination of those who claimed to be immune, the doctor at Millhaven discovered a common genetic trait, a gene that appeared to be inherited through the father's side. This suggested that men were statistically more resistant to the effects of the virus, though the gene could also be passed on to daughters. But it meant more than just resistance. These survivors were immune to the effects of the green flu, but they were still infected. They were carriers, unknowing Trojan horses who passed through CEDA's screening tests into safe havens, evacuation zones, and airports. They appeared healthy but infected everyone around them. This was a major part of how the green flu had spread so easily into safe rooms and through the survivors who did everything in their power to evade the infected. When this was reported to the military, everything changed. At around the 3-week mark, the military took full control as CEDA had failed to stop the virus, and it was here that they had to make an incredibly tough decision for the future of humanity. A carrier was still an infected, and as long as they lived, so too did the virus. In quarantine zones, the military knew exactly which gene to test for when a survivor approached and requested entry. Each person was swabbed. Those who tested negative for infection or the carrier gene were given one color of wristband, while those who tested positive received another. The groups were separated, instructed to stay with their group, and to keep their issued filtration masks on. Anyone who refused to comply was shot on sight. Those who wore the uninfected color were offered safe passage to a safe zone. However, those with the carrier color, well, they were brought to a pit and executed in a line. Without a cure, the only future they saw was one without carriers. In just 3 weeks, Pennsylvania had fallen completely, and it spread out to the states around it. Although evacuation points were set up from Washington, D.C. to Birmingham to St. Petersburg, more became victims and joined the hordes. Throughout the entire ordeal, CEDA failed, lied to the public, and the military had to take over to ensure the survival of the human race. Carriers were to be exterminated on sight, and national landmarks and important locations were taken out to slow the spread. One of those was the Veterans Memorial Bridge in New Orleans. That was all they could do to slow down the infection, and as of now, that is where the story of the green flu comes to an end. a new way of life on the way for the rest of the world. The question still remained, was this a biological weapon? Was it a virus that came naturally and evolved quickly, or was it an act of God? This story came to an end around the 3-week mark, and as we wait for another insight into this universe, we can think about the good. How survivors offered passage in helicopters and boats to those they encountered. But unfortunately, these encounters were likely with carriers who unknowingly repaid their kindness with infection. This is a dark story, and hopefully one day we will find out if it was stopped or if it did eventually spread to the rest of the world. This was a really fun one to make. I love exploring these darker scenarios and actually understanding how something like this spreads. I will admit at points, it felt very familiar. Speaking of our version of what happened years ago, I got it for the first time a couple of months ago. It was terrible. Anyway, in the future, I think I would like to break down each special infected properly and explore how they became what they became. I would have done it in this video, but I wanted it to be more dedicated to the green flu, what it was and how it spread. Let me know in the comments if that is something you would like to see. This is such a special world, and I do hope we get another game in this series at some point. I also want to ask what your favourite special infected is. I will always say the Charger, an unavoidable chaotic moment always waiting to happen. That was everything I wanted to say. If you enjoyed this video, then I would love you to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know in the comments what you thought. Finally, I would like to thank my Gold Tier patrons and channel members: Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Daniel Cal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yali Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, and Brina Lee. What did you think of this topic? What is your favourite infected? And what would you like me to cover next? Let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one.